Aristotle once defined tragedy as a morally ambiguous genre in which a noble hero goes from good fortune to bad. Heroes in tragedies often aren't good or bad people, they often tend to be morally grey, or as Aristotle put it, they are between two extremes. These extremes being good and evil. Such examples of these characters who walk these morally grey lines are Guts from Kentaro Miura's Berserk, Jon Snow from Game of Thrones, Walter White from Breaking Bad, and NieR from the JRPG game NieR Replicant. But what is the point of tragedy? Why do we as people consume it? Why is it such a prevalent thing in our lives? And why is it so important for us to experience it? For about the past month and a half, these questions were living rent-free in my head, and the reasons they were living in my head is because after years of avoiding it, I finally decided to sit down and finally read Sui Ishida's manga series Tokyo Ghoul. I also decided to traumatize myself further by then playing both NieR Replicant and NieR Automata. I also watched season 1 of To Your Eternity again, and as you can imagine, after experiencing such existential inducing media, I didn't have the most productive month. The reason for this is because of tragedy. One of the questions I found myself asking when I was reading Tokyo Ghoul and playing the NieR games was, why do our favorite characters suffer?
Glory to mankind.
Now, as with all my videos, I want to start off with a question, and that question is, what made you fall in love with tragic storytelling? As someone whose first real piece of tragic storytelling was Berserk, I swear I can't go one video without talking about Berserk. This seinen manga was the first time I can say that I actually cried when I read manga. For those of you who don't know what Berserk is, then let me give you a quick summary. Berserk is the dark fantasy horror manga series written and illustrated by Kentaro Miura. It follows the wandering swordsman by the name of Guts, who has sworn to kill the one who cursed him and his lover. Throughout his journey, Guts is faced time and time again with the moral quandary of what is important to him. Seeking revenge on the person who cursed him, or protecting and caring for his loved ones while having to battle his own inner demons. Berserk is a really special piece of storytelling to me, and nothing could really fill the gap that Berserk left. Actually, reading and having to watch Guts' endless suffering was something I didn't get when I read other manga, watched TV or anime, or even when I played video games. There's a certain magic that Miura managed to capture when he wrote Berserk, that lightning in a bottle that I don't think anyone could replicate even if they wanted to. I'm someone who for the longest time really struggled to understand media, so the first time I read Berserk, I really struggled to find answers as to why Guts suffered so much, and the more I read Berserk, the more I started to understand the point of Guts' character and the point of Berserk as a whole. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, so I want us to rewind a little, back to the year of 2016, because while Berserk was when I first really started understanding tragedy, it wasn't my first experience with it.
Keep moving. The legend says the tomb sits atop this peak.
Lovely! We can freeze to death while digging for the bones of a madwoman.
When I was younger, one of the first video games I really loved playing was Dragon Age Origins. The main thing that really attracted me to the game was mainly the combat system. I also want to emphasize that I was 15 years old when I played this game. The main thing I only liked the game for was the cool combat system and the fact that you could throw a magic fireball at people. That was just really cool to 15-year-old me. I never really cared for things like plot or character arcs or plot progression in the story. I just wanted to kill all the bad guys with my magic fireballs. I'ma let you sit on that. Even when I started playing Dragon Age 2, the sequel to the game, I still wasn't really invested in the story, but for some reason, I always grew up really loving the game despite knowing that it wasn't considered people's favorite and knowing that it was considered the worst game in the Dragon Age franchise. Now, despite how long this tangent is getting, I swear there is a point to it and it will make sense as the video progresses. When I played Dragon Age 2, I often found myself asking, why do you love this game so much despite the fact that it's terrible? I asked myself this when I was younger, and it was only after I read Berserk did I fully understand why I loved the game so much. For those of you unaware, the Dragon Age games, much like the thing that inspired their creation, are a trilogy of dark fantasy RPGs. I probably should have started with that when I started talking about Dragon Age, but fuck it, we are like 5 minutes into this behemoth of a video, so I don't care. Now, I won't spoil what happens in any of these games except a little bit of Dragon Age 2, but you should go ahead and play these games. I highly recommend them. Dragon Age Origins is one of the best RPGs of all time, and I will die on this hill. But before you do that...
Hey nerd, it's me again. I'm here to remind you to subscribe. If you subscribe and leave a like, I'll go teach some grass. If you leave a comment as well, I'll give you another kiss.
I said earlier that I love Dragon Age 2 despite the fact that it's a terrible game, and the reason I finally came to understand this is because of how well these games utilize Fraytags. I finally came to understand this because of how well these games utilize Fraytag's pyramid to tell tragic stories. Dragon Age 2 follows our main character Hawk, who, regardless of the choices you make in the game, ends up having one of the most tragic character arcs in gaming. As the game progresses, Hawk loses all of his loved ones, from his sister or brother at the start of the game to their mother by the end of the game. Time and time again, tragedy and death seem to follow Hawk everywhere he goes. He has people's expectations constantly placed on him. He has to often deal with the worst parts of humanity. And if you choose to play as a mage, the beings in the Dragon Age world who use magic, you see how often people like him tend to suffer from discrimination.
What other option do we have? Tell me, champion, that you have not seen with your own eyes what they can do, heard the lies of mages that seek power.
And the more you understand this, the more you begin to understand how difficult it must be for him to carry all this pain and suffering. One of the many aspects of this game is the ability to allow you to choose what Hawk says in dialogue scenes, you know, the dialogue wheel. One of the many things that popularized the Mass Effect franchise. And in between the more thoughtful and friendly responses and the frustrated but apathetic dialogue options, there is the jovial comedic option where Hawk puts on a more humorous tone with whoever he's talking to. And once I realized how dark this game can get, that comedic option started to make more sense. You see, Hawk is a character who constantly gets the short end of the stick. Even when he wins, he still loses. When I said at the start that the games utilize Fraytag's pyramid, I wasn't joking. Much like how in Berserk, when something good happens in the story, there's always something bad that tends to follow the happiness our characters experience. To use an example of this, take one of the main characters, Casca, for example.
Hey y'all, Editor Ty again. I know it's been 8 minutes into the video and you're probably wondering what the point of this interruption is about. Well, I wanted to quickly recommend you guys go watch the Berserk as a Nietzschean tragedy video by Jonas Seeker, CCK Philosophy. I forgot to mention it at the start of the video, but I wanted to make it clear that this video is not some super in-depth analysis on tragedy in media. The things I talk about in this video are my own personal experiences with these stories and how I feel about them. I don't want to make it seem like I'm super smart or anything. I just wanted to talk about these things I like because they affected me on a personal level, and I'd like to share that with all of you. I also apologize because there will be more parts in the video where I randomly interrupt to add in more information I think is interesting. Don't worry though, I'll use Barack Obama's voice so you don't have to listen to this robotic ass voice lol.
So there is a moment in the story where Casca finally regains her memories after the events of the eclipse had shattered her mind. She has one desire after finally regaining her memory, and that's to see the one person she wasn't able to because she was basically in a vegetative state because of what happened during the eclipse. Now in Fraytag's pyramid, the structure of a tragedy goes as follows: introduction, rising action, climax, falling action, consequence. The introduction of Casca being able to regain her memories would be the introduction. The rising action would be when Farnese and Shirke go into her mind to piece her memory back together, and you would believe that her regaining her memory and finally being able to be with Guts would be the climax, but that's where you're wrong. The moment she receives her memories and goes back to normal is the final climax. Her desire to see Guts is the falling action, and the consequence of her finally having her memories returned to her is not being able to look at Guts without experiencing visions from the eclipse that cause her to have breakdowns. In Dragon Age 2, the story structure is pretty much the same. Actions have consequences. If you leave your sibling in favor of bringing someone stronger with you in the game's Act 1 main quest, then your sibling ends up joining whatever faction you might end up fighting later in the game. If you take them with you, you run the risk of losing them to a sickness they contracted during the expedition, and not only do you also run the risk of them dying, the consequences of bringing them with you is losing the trust of your mother who begged you to not take your now dying sibling with them. The only way to save your sibling is to force them to undergo a ritual that will only buy them a few more years at most. Play Dragon Age Origins and you'll understand why. But if you choose this option, Hawk loses his last sibling. He failed his duty as their big brother to protect them.
Are you sure about this? I'm not sure about anything, but I want you to live.
If you thought that seemed a little light for you, don't worry, it gets worse. You see, around the second act of the game, you get a quest called All That Remains, and if you thought that losing Hawk's sibling was tragic, then prepare yourself, because this is just a prelude to what I consider the worst day of Hawk's life. The quest has you following a trail of serial murders that have been happening over the last 6 years that Act 1 and Act 2 take place in. The murderer in question is a blood mage by the name of Quentin, who's been finding and murdering women who resemble his dead wife. What he did to lure these women out in order to get them into his clutches is that he would start by sending them white lilies under the guise of being a suitor interested in them. He would then proceed to capture them, tear their bodies apart limb from limb, then piece them back together to essentially make a puppet of what once resembled his former wife. He then proceeds to summon a demon that uses their body as a host. Hawk's mother had the unfortunate luck of looking like Quentin's former wife, and as a result of this, Quentin made her his next victim. After you kill the lunatic, you get what is probably one of the most heartbreaking cutscenes in the game, with Hawk's mother regaining control of herself after you kill the demon possessing her, but the damage to her mind and body is too much for even a healer to fix. In her final moments, she tells both Hawk and the player how proud she is of how far you've managed to come, despite all the hurdles you faced before she takes her last breath. After that, it's over. The game proceeds as normal, but that one same spot that your mother used to stand in each time Hawk would come home is now empty. The family home you spent so long trying to get back for your mother is now colder than ever, and Hawk can't even bring himself to open her bedroom door even 3 years after her death in the game. One of the things that hurts me the most about the aftermath of Hawk's mom dying is the fact that if you're a mage, your uncle blames the fact that magic exists, and you can see that he wishes that magic was never part of the Hawk family.
The killer used Mother to magically reconstruct his dead wife. They had the same face.
What sort of nightmarish magic is that? Oh, Maker! Maybe the Templars are right. Lock the mages up. Throw away the key.
Do you want them to lock me up too, Uncle?
I don't know. You would have been better off if you were just normal like carver.
It's a subtle detail like that that really shows how bad the discrimination is, how even your own family will look at you as someone dangerous even though you don't present an imminent danger to them. And it really adds to the tragedy of Hawk's character if you are playing as a mage yourself. Hawk starts the game with his family, but by the start of Act 3, he's alone. His sibling doesn't even want to talk to him because you forced them to become a Grey Warden if you chose to save them during the Act 1 expedition. Hawk essentially has no one outside of one of his love interests that he can consider his family. And after you experience all this as the player, that same purple humorous dialogue option takes on a much sadder meaning as you start to understand that Hawk is just masking all his sadness and sorrow by using comedy as a crutch. I can't describe to you guys how broken Hawk must be as a character, because even after all the shit they go through, they still keep moving forward. But you're probably wondering why, right? Wouldn't moving forward bring on more sadness, more sorrow, and probably pile on more bodies to the heap that Hawk has continued to leave behind? Wouldn't it be much easier to just give up? This is a question I feel is best answered in the NieR games. If you've ever played any of the NieR games, then you are aware of how brutal these game stories can be. Yoko Taro, the creator of the games, tends to trick the players with very subtle things that you won't initially notice on the first playthrough. For example, when you play NieR Replicant, you fight these things called shades, these shadow-like creatures that pop up in the game world, and the first instinct you have whenever you see them is to attack them because they seem dangerous. Whenever we play games that allow us to fight or attack something, our brains basically go into fight or flight mode. We can't really rationalize things very quickly the moment we see danger in a game, so our first instinct when we see the shades is to attack them. It's not until you play the game again that you start noticing something is very wrong. The shades start getting humanized, and when you learn what they actually are from all their backstories, you start realizing how monstrous NieR and you the player are. K Jewelers has a really amazing video on NieR as a protagonist, so check that out in your spare time. But one of the things I feel K Jewelers left out in the video is the fact that if you approach the shades during the first playthrough of the game without attacking any of them before you get wise, the shades don't attack you. If you don't attack the baby shades, they don't attack you. You can walk in front of them, approach them, and they will never attack you.
It's really things like these that add to the tragedy of a character like NieR. Although NieR has a noble goal of protecting and being with his sister, his hatred against the Shades is turning him into a monster. He's so driven by hatred that the pleas of the Shades basically go unheard while NieR cuts down literal children who have nothing to do with his quest for revenge. We sympathize with NieR because Route A of NieR Replicant shows us the lengths we are willing to go to protect our loved ones. But when you play the other routes of the game, you begin to question if you are in the right. Yoko Taro once said in an interview that you don't have to be insane to kill someone, you just have to think you are right. In the context of NieR Replicant, it really adds to NieR as a character. NieR views the Shades as monsters who took away his sister, so he swears to kill every one of them without even bothering to understand them first. Even when Gideon, a character who hates the machines in the games, basically shows NieR the person he is becoming in the junk heap. NieR never reflects. In NieR's mind, he still believes that the Shades are monsters that deserved to be put down, and the result of this is NieR becoming the true monster of the game. I like to believe that when Yoko Taro made NieR Replicant, he wanted to make a story that represents the worst parts of humanity, while also showing the light that shines in that deep darkness. I think Yoko Taro chooses to structure his games like this because in some way, we are all like NieR. We would do anything it takes to be with the people we love, even if that means becoming monsters in the process.
I don't want to overlook all the traumatic shit that NieR, the protagonist, goes through before the events of the game, like him getting sexually assaulted and how that would probably be one of the factors that outside of the player's input would add to NieR probably being an already unstable, broken kid just trying to do what he believes is right for the people he cares about. But as much as I love NieR Replicant, I feel like I should mention NieR Automata in this conversation as well. If you're familiar with the story story of NieR
Automata.
then you already know what I'm going to talk about. Now, this is just my personal opinion, but I've always shared the sentiment that the NieR games are all tragic love stories, with NieR Automata being the biggest example of this idea. A non-expressive android like 2B eventually falling in love with the person she's been forced to kill over and over again, and we even hear her dialogue about how she clearly hates having to be the one to kill him at the end of the first route of the game when she says this.
It always ends like this.
It really shows you how heartbreaking the story's game is. You can tell that even though it's never explained when 2B started killing 9S, it was from a place of duty, and the more time she spent with him before eventually having to kill him again was the more times she grew to actually love him. One of her biggest sayings and one of the main things she's known in the game for is her saying, "Emotions are prohibited," and much like Replicant, these carry more underlying tones in them. She's not saying emotions are prohibited to 9S, she's saying that to herself to keep her own emotions in check. She already struggles with being an android that can feel emotions, and having love, specifically love for 9S, the one person she's probably felt a ton of guilt over for killing time and time again, must be something that has forced her to try and shut off any emotions at all. Hence the saying, emotions are prohibited. It also doesn't help that androids have this very odd program that makes them sexually aroused during combat, so 2B would probably be even more disgusted with herself for finding pleasure in killing the person she loves. Man, these games are dark. 2B and 9S have one of the most beautiful relationships in gaming. I'd even argue that they have one of the most beautiful love stories in media as a whole, and I think nothing displays that more than the confrontation with Adam. You already know what I'm referring to if you've played these games. It's when Adam specifically says to 9S that 9S wants to blank 4-letter word 2B, and I've seen a ton of speculations and theories as to what the actual meaning of what 9S actually wants to do to 2B is, and all these different words that fill in the blank spot, depending on your interpretation, all add to the complex nature of 2B and 9S's relationship. It really makes you feel bad for these two because you can feel that they want to be together, but their circumstances won't let them be together in a way that will allow them to be happy. And I was going to explore their relationship a bit more, but I feel like I would be removing the chance for people to play this game. So for now, I'll just say this: play the NieR games if you're interested in anything I'm saying, and don't just play the games, read the books, read the manga, any piece of NieR content that shows you the stories of these games. Absorb it as much as possible because these games are both beautiful and tragic pieces of storytelling, and despite how nihilistic I've made these games sound, there is a point to all the suffering that our characters go through. I was going to add in a section here about Cyberpunk 2077, but I feel like using Dragon Age and the NieR games are a much better choice because they are examples of games that basically are filled with tragedy, and they explore characters really well. And while I was writing the script for this video, they really reminded me of why I love games that don't have happy endings. Tragedy is a very hard thing to explore, but good writers like Yoko Taro are able to explore it and dig out some of the most gut-wrenching truths that we are sometimes too afraid to acknowledge. Play these games, you won't regret it, and if you want to recommend me some games as well that you feel I will like that have similar stories, feel free to do so and tell me why in the comments. So in my death of long-running anime video, I said that when we grow up, we often tend to look up to characters we grow with. these characters who tend to be given the short end of the stick from the moment they are born. Naruto losing both his parents after his birth, Lucy being abused by her father, Asta being the only wizard to not have magic in a world full of it. And outside the shonen demographic, the stories are much darker and more tragic. The trauma Subaru suffers every time he dies, coupled with the fact that he can't tell anyone what his powers are. Sophin's journey of trying to kill Askeladd. David not picking Rebecca over Lucy. Tragedy often tends to pop up in anime and manga more often than you would expect, and when handled perfectly, it can make understanding why a character suffers in a story more clear to the audience. Or I could just be a sadomasochistic weirdo who likes hurting himself by watching people suffer. Oh god. Something is wrong with me. At the start of the video, I said that I finally took time to read Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re, and while I was going to initially make a video on why we love tragic characters in anime and manga while I was reading Tokyo Ghoul, the idea quickly started to shift into something else the more I read the manga. Tragedy is more than just an event that can change your character's trajectory in a story. It's a tool. A good author, in my opinion, can use tragedy not as a way to just endlessly hurt their character, but to also show the different aspects in which these same characters deal with specific moments in the story because of the amount of suffering they've experienced. And I think Tokyo Ghoul is the biggest example of this. Aside from knowing that the anime community's general opinion of the anime adaptation is that it's shit, I could never bring myself to sit down and watch a full episode of the show because of that, so I decided to just read the manga. And while it's shit, obvious jokes aside, Tokyo Ghoul is a story I feel will stay with me for a long time. It may not be amazing, but the story it tells is one of a kind, and it explores tragedy and the human condition in one of the rawest forms through the usage of its main character Ken Kaneki. Tokyo Ghoul is a seinen horror battle manga written and illustrated by Sui Ishida. It follows the story of our protagonist Ken Kaneki, who at the beginning of the story starts out as just a normal college student, but is eventually dragged into the supernatural underworld of Tokyo. As the story progresses, he is forced to come to terms with the fact that he is no longer human. He has to deal with his identity and deal with the fact that he is slowly becoming the symbol that represents the two factions he's forced to constantly side with throughout all 30 volumes of the manga. Kaneki goes through multiple identity crises. Identity crisis. God damn it. Kaneki goes through multiple identity crises throughout the story. He falls apart numerous times throughout the story and constantly gets himself into situations where he nearly gets himself killed, all for the sake of protecting his loved ones and bringing the war between ghouls and humans to an end. One of the reasons I view Tokyo Ghoul as such a beautiful piece of tragic storytelling is because of how it displays the human psyche. Ishida has this amazing skill of being able to display how easy it is for someone to fall apart. One of the most famous chapters of the manga is the chapter where Jason tortures Kaneki. He cuts off body parts, he lets a centipede run through his ear canal, he puts Kaneki under so much stress that his hair turns white, and the longer these horrific acts go on, Kaneki's humanity slowly begins to be stripped away from him. He has to come to terms with the fact that he isn't human anymore, and we can see that through Ishida's paneling and disorienting artwork. Kaneki screams and pleas for the suffering to stop fill the page. It almost gets to the point where it becomes sensory overload. The panels break down, and through all this we get to see Kaneki's childhood after his mother died. We see that his aunt was a bitter and resentful person, how she would never accept him no matter how much he tried, and how eventually he grew to understand that no one in his own family aside from his mother even loved him. And yet, despite all the suffering he went through, he never stopped being a kind person. A lot of people tend to think that Tokyo Ghoul is just a very edgy show, and while this assessment isn't wrong, it also isn't right. If you're a long-time subscriber of mine, then you know that last year I made a video on Black Lagoon calling it a flawed cult classic. I will be the first to admit that I didn't know what the fuck I was talking about in that video. And to paraphrase some of the things I said in that video, I said that the characters had no substance and that the story was mainly focused on the mindless action and that the show wasn't taking itself seriously. I didn't try to understand the story beyond the surface level stuff I was looking at, and because of that, I made a video not knowing what the fuck I was talking about. If I could go back in time and do that video over again, it would probably be on why Revi is one of the most tragic and compelling characters in manga. This is the mentality I feel a lot of people who view Tokyo Ghoul as just an edgy show had. And this isn't just exclusive to Tokyo Ghoul. If you've ever read Berserk, I swear this is the last time I'm going to mention Berserk in the video, then you know that Berserk often gets crowned as one of the edgiest manga ever made. No one tries to look beyond the surface level things we are shown in the manga to understand what the story is about. They just see Guts as one of these characters who would unironically say, "Nothing personnel, kid," to some random innocent before killing them. This has honestly become such a big problem to me because the nuance is taken out of so many stories, all for the sake of making really bad takes on Twitter just so people can get engagement. Scenes like Shinji being in the hospital with Asuka have all the nuance removed from them because it's funny that Shinji decided that he wasn't going to participate in No Nut November while his friend was literally unconscious right in front of him. Even with more recent examples with Mushoku Tensei Season 2 with Rudeus having to deal with erectile dysfunction after Eris left him, even Guts showing his emotions can be memed to death because people fail to understand the nuance of these specific moments. Although I will admit, this manga panel is pretty funny. The point I'm trying to make is this: these moments in the story aren't funny. They aren't meant to be funny despite how much we laugh at them. They are moments to show how far our characters have fallen, how difficult the trauma they are experiencing is, how much it hurts for them to keep living, and the destructive ways in which they process that trauma. For Rudeus, it's through drinking. For Shinji, it's to try and find something that gives him some sort of momentary happiness because his life is so messed up. And for Guts, it's through using his violent tendencies and bloodlust for the ones who hurt him so he doesn't have to face his trauma. And if you want to go back to video games and use that as a reference point, take the entire God of War franchise and look at how much anger and rage
Kratos has
in the first 3 games, and then look at God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok and look at how he confronts his trauma and how much you can tell that what he was doing, although it was really fucking cool, was really bad for him. He was using killing all the gods as a way to vent out his frustration. Even looking at the Blades of Chaos are something that he doesn't do until later in the game because he's avoiding facing that part of himself. These characters suffer and there isn't really a cathartic release until these characters are put in positions where they realize how destructive their behavior was. That moment when Shinji realizes what he's done, the scene where Rudeus in a single moment decides he doesn't want to live anymore and almost does something he knows he won't be able to take back only to be stopped and talked out of it by a close friend. Guts being called out on the fact that he abandoned Casca instead of being with her when she was at her most vulnerable. Kaneki realizing that he wants to live for the sake of Toka. Rebecca realizing she loves David despite knowing her feelings won't be reciprocated and helping him anyway. It's things like this that remind me why I love tragic stories so much. It's things like this that remind me how beautiful the medium of manga and anime are when subjects like this are handled by people who understand how to write nuanced characters. Now this is going to be a small tangent, so if you want to skip ahead to the last chunk of the video where I talk about why we love tragedy in media, feel free to skip ahead. This is mainly for me to talk about one of my favorite concepts in tragic storytelling, and that's the idea of the immortal character. I feel like we often forget how finite our lives are as humans. We won't live forever, and that's one of the harsh truths of being alive. And with how busy our lives get, we tend to not have time to do the things we want, to not spend time with the people we care about. It's why I've always loved stories that have immortal beings that live in the world. If you've watched Lord of the Rings, then you know that immortal elves have basically become a staple of the fantasy genre. There's always been a certain charm to immortal beings like elves in fiction. What are beings who have an abundance of time meant to do? Are things like falling in love necessary for elves outside of their race if they know their partners will die before them? How do elves view things like the passage of time when they can live forever? I always had these thoughts in my head, and it took me watching 2 shows to finally get to an answer to these questions. The first show being To Your Eternity, and the second show being Frieren Beyond Journey's End. And these shows explore being able to live forever as a concept very well. And they also explore how tragic it must be to live forever. To Your Eternity follows Fushi, a sentient rock. Yeah, if I'm being honest, I have no idea what Fushi is. He's just a weird immortal rock that was granted immortality and the ability to shapeshift into anything he wants. And as the story progresses, Fushi meets people and eventually grows to have emotions and begins to understand what things like love, friendship, and kindness are. Frieren, on the other hand, is a completely different
story.
Frieren is already a sentient immortal elf, and her character arc is very different from Fushi's. I think Gigak described it best when he said that Frieren is a story about learning to enjoy the little things in life. Frieren has already done the world-ending quest. She's already had companions and saved hundreds of lives, but her journey was only a quarter of her actual life. That's why her actual story doesn't start at the beginning of the quest, but rather it starts at the end. The thing I love about these 2 series is how they both explore how tragic living forever must be to an immortal being. For someone like Fushi, who will essentially never die, he's had to experience and bear witness to his loved ones die over the course of multiple decades and centuries. Each time they die, he's forced to feel their emotions as their souls eventually become a part of his, and he ends up being able to transform into them. Frieren's journey is more one of self-reflection. The death of the hero Himmel was the first time she actually experienced real loss, and because of this, she goes on a journey basically to retread all the moments she didn't take a second to enjoy with the hero's party on her first journey. Frieren and Fushi both beautifully display how sad the idea of living forever is. Fushi has lived and spent time with these people, and as a result of that, he becomes more human, and something all humans experience is loss. So the pain of seeing his loved ones die and knowing that Fushi himself can't die and be with them in death, but instead have them become a part of him, is what makes To Your Eternity such a beautiful story to experience. Frieren is similar in that regard because during the first episode, you can clearly tell that she's probably become numb to the idea of anyone around her dying. She's essentially immortal, so why would the death of people in her mind
Who have
spend not even a fraction of her lifespan
affect her?
Her journey is about letting go of this mindset and learning to not take things for granted, and it takes losing someone for her to understand how precious time is, how precious it is to enjoy things and enjoy living with the people she cares about. I think living forever is honestly really terrifying. The idea of losing all the people you care about and not being able to do a thing about it is genuinely scary, and the fear of eventually growing numb to losing people you care about is not a great feeling. We've seen the result of immortal beings who lose everything and everyone and suffer as a result of this, and the only thing they view as a possible escape would be death. Akira from Devilman Crybaby and Alucard from Hellsing Ultimate would be characters I consider good examples of this, and if you want someone more new and recent, we can use Makima from Chainsaw Man as an example. Despite the vile and heinous things she did to Denji, Makima is probably one of the most emotionally stunted characters in the entire series because she's clearly been around for a long time, and yet one of the things she desires is the ability to do things like feel honest human emotion. But this is just my subjective opinion. Maybe I'm reading a bit too deeply into it. Regardless of that though, I can't recommend these shows enough. They are really amazing. I genuinely want everyone who hasn't watched them to watch them. These shows are great. Please watch them. You won't regret it. For that, rant over. Suffering builds character. Despite how much we tend to use this saying in a comedic manner, it's true. Tragedy is more than just a character dying. It's more than just bad things happening to a character that makes them confront their own mortality. And tragedy is more than just a character being abused for the sake of entertaining the audience. I'm looking at you, Jujika no Rokunin. No, tragedy is something characters go through in order to become better, stronger, and kinder individuals.
Never again. I'll never hurt anyone again. From this moment on, I am through with violence. I will be reborn.
Without Luffy losing his brother during the Marineford War arc, he wouldn't have resolved himself to become a stronger captain that would protect his crewmates, so he wouldn't have to experience losing anyone again. Without V losing Jackie in Cyberpunk 2077 and being in a condition where he's going to die, she doesn't realize how stupid the dream of being a legend in Night City is. For anyone wondering why I'm using both genders, you can choose the gender of the character. And without Thorfinn getting robbed of his revenge, he never would have gone on a journey to become someone who never chooses violence as a first choice. I want to emphasize that these stories aren't good because they are tragedies. That would be taking away from what makes them good in the first place. The added bonus of them being tragedies is what makes them good stories. It's the exploration of these characters that makes these stories so good. It's one of the reasons we invest so much of our time getting invested in these stories that nerds like me love so much. It's why 7 years later, people like me can still pick up terrible games like Dragon Age 2 and love the stories in them. It's why I can sit through very long Berserk hiatuses waiting for a single chapter to come out, because I'm invested in these characters' stories. Tragedies are very important for us because they are some of the few stories that allow us to confront the worst parts of ourselves, and it's through these stories that we ourselves can become better individuals. I remember the first time I read Vinland Saga. Thorfinn's story of wanting to be a gentler, kinder person is something that resonated with me a lot. Just like Thorfinn, I used to be this very angry, emotional kid who let his anger control him, all because of my relationship with my dad. Because of that, I was a very angry and bitter person. I never really considered how people felt around me, and it honestly made me an unbearable person to be around. And reading Vinland Saga and seeing Thorfinn's journey of letting go of his hatred to become a better, stronger, and kinder person was the first time I really started reflecting on who I was as a person. That isn't to say that I wasn't working on being a good person at the time, but Vinland Saga was the first time I really started understanding the negative sides of myself the most. I also then fell into a dark hole of reading some of the most depressing manga that forced me to come to terms with how shitty a person I was. Yeah. If you ever want to do some self-reflecting, read an Oshimishuzo manga. That's the point of what I'm trying to say. The reasons we consume all these sad stories and the stories where characters suffer, reflect on who they are, and get back up is because we want to better ourselves as individuals. We see these characters overcome the obstacles in their way, and it motivates us to become better people. One of my favorite sayings is actually from God of War, and it's when Kratos tells Atreus, "Don't be sorry, be better." and how that gets reflected back at him in God of War Ragnarok is just a really beautiful message. We see these characters overcome the obstacles in their way, and it motivates us to be better people. I can't count the number of tweets and Reddit posts and comments I've seen of people who say characters like Thorfinn help them because they are dealing with an addiction, or how characters like Asta and Guts reminded them to not give up and push past their limits. And that, in my opinion, is the power of tragedy. It's being able to help someone through a story, teaching them things they didn't know about themselves and helping them grow as people. But that's just my opinion. How do you guys feel on it? Do you think that tragedies are good and they aren't just a way to emotionally guilt trip the audience into crying and feeling sorry for the characters? Do you have a tragic story that changed your life in any way? I'm really curious to know how people view this medium of storytelling, because for me, it's changed my life personally. I've read some of the most sad and deranged and sad shit, not going to lie, and each time I stumble upon manga or TV shows or anime like that, it shows me different parts of myself, or it shows me people that I can aspire to be like, who don't give up in the face of adversity. But you know what would be a bigger tragedy? You not subscribing to me. Subscribe, bro. Like, help a brother out. No, but genuinely, like, if you like the video, please like it, please subscribe, please comment. Like, you have no idea how much it genuinely helps me, and it helps my video get boosted in the algorithm. Like, I didn't expect that previous video I dropped 2 weeks ago to do so many numbers, and that's all because people subscribed and liked and shared the video. Like, it really helps a ton. I know it sounds like I am begging, and yeah, I kinda am, you know, cause I want YouTube money. I want YouTube to pay me. But like, genuinely, it does help, and it does introduce my content to people who might be interested in it, or people who want to have a discussion about stuff that they feel no one talks about. Like, it genuinely helps a ton, and I would appreciate it if you guys, you know, subscribe, like the video, share it. I'll give you a kiss. I will fly from South Africa to America, or wherever you people subscribe from, wherever you are. I will come over there and I will kiss you on the cheek and pat you on the head and go, thank you, my sister, brother, non-binary queen. Thank you for supporting. I'm going to piss off so many people with that last. That was a joke. Please don't harass me in the comment. That was a joke. But I genuinely mean it. Please subscribe. Please like the video. Please comment. It helps. And yeah, thanks for watching. And I will see you later.